Have you ever just stopped and wondered how someone can deny something as massively documented as the Holocaust? I mean, it's not just about getting up and saying it didn't happen. It's more complicated than that. It's a whole system of arguments, like a carefully built building, an architecture of denial. And in this first part of our deep dive, we're going to use the figure David Irving as a kind of case study to see how that architecture is built. We're going to focus on how he builds his case, not just what he claims. So let's get into it and take this thing apart, piece by piece. Okay, before we go any further, we have to draw a super clear line in the sand. Think of it like this. History is kind of like a giant block of marble. A real historian, a legitimate revisionist, finds a new piece of evidence, and it's like they've got a new, finer chisel. They carefully chip away to reveal a more accurate shape. That's revisionism. It's about getting closer to the truth. But a denier shows up with a sledgehammer, ignores the facts completely, and just smashes the marble to create a shape that they wanted all along. David Irving presents himself as the sculptor, but as we're about to see, his methods, well, they look a lot more like the sledgehammer. So, here's our game plan for today. First, we're going to look at the character, the persona that Irving creates for himself. It's super important. Then, we're going to deconstruct the three main pillars of his argument. This idea of a missing order from Hitler, the claims about technical problems with the gas chambers, and then the way he plays games with the number of victims. And finally, we'll tie it all together to see how it creates this one powerful story. Let's start with the absolute foundation of this whole structure. The character. You see, before we can even get into the historical claims, we have to understand the persona that David Irving builds. And trust me, this isn't just for show. It is the lens through which he wants you to see everything else he says. I mean, just look at this. It's a classic hero story, right? He's not just some historian. He's a brave, lone truth-teller fighting against a powerful, rigid establishment. He's the guy who dares to say what no one else will, and this is key, he claims he's being persecuted for it. This is a brilliant rhetorical setup. It means that whenever someone criticizes his work with facts, he can just turn around and say, "See, they're trying to silence me. It proves I'm right." It's the ultimate defense mechanism baked right into his personal story. All right, so now that we get the hero persona he's created, let's look at how he actually builds his case. And the very first pillar is probably his most famous, maybe his most powerful. It's what you'd call an argument from absence, and it centers on one person, Adolf Hitler. There is no document. That's the line. It's simple, it sounds factual, and it's a huge challenge to mainstream history. What it does is create this little seed of doubt by demanding a very, very specific type of evidence, a single piece of paper with Hitler's signature on it, a smoking gun. The rhetorical genius of this is its simplicity. It puts all the pressure on historians to produce this one specific document, and while they're explaining why that's not how the Nazi regime worked, he's busy building a whole alternative story in that empty space. So using this idea of a missing document, he weaves an entirely new version of history. He argues that, without a written order, well, Hitler must have only wanted to deport the Jews. The genocide, he says, that was just something the SS did on their own, maybe even something Hitler didn't want. And to back this up, he cherry-picks his evidence. He'll take vague diary entries out of context, or he'll point to a very famous note from Himmler's log about one single transport that says no liquidation of Jews, and he presents that as if it were a general policy, all while completely ignoring the mountain of other evidence that points in the exact opposite direction. All right, so the second pillar moves us from the dusty archives into the realm of science and engineering. We're shifting away from paper trails, and we're looking at the physical mechanics of the Holocaust. This is where Irving tries to argue that it was all, technically impossible. He's not questioning the why so much anymore. He's questioning the how. So he just throws out this whole series of what sound like very technical, very scientific problems. For example, he'll correctly point out that Zyklon B was used as a delousing agent, but then he'll make the illogical leap to say it couldn't also have been used to kill people. He'll use very selective architectural plans to claim the buildings couldn't have worked the way survivors said they did. He'll do his own weird math on the crematoria to argue the numbers just don't add up. And then, in another argument from absence, he points to the ruins of the gas chambers, which, remember, the Nazis themselves dynamited to hide their crimes, and he uses that destruction as proof they were never there for mass murder in the first place. It's a really slick way to try and reframe a historical horror as a calm, scientific debate. But you're probably thinking, what about the thousands upon thousands of people who saw it happen? Well, for his technical arguments to even begin to work, he has to get rid of the eyewitnesses. And this is where he gets really subtle.
Instead of just calling them all liars, which would sound cruel and obvious, he puts on this sympathetic, almost patronizing act. He'll say things like, oh, their memories are sincere to them, but they're factually unreliable. They're distorted by trauma. It is a devastatingly effective way to dismiss the most powerful evidence against him, not with a sledgehammer, but with a quiet, dismissive wave of the hand.
Okay, so he's questioned the orders, he's questioned the mechanics. The next logical step in building this architecture of denial is to go after the sheer scale of the atrocity itself. This is the third pillar, what we can call the numbers game, and his focus here is almost always on Auschwitz.
This phrase right here is the core of this strategy. It sounds almost reasonable at first because he's admitting, yes, people died. But notice the pivot. He's completely changing how and why they died. He takes an act of systematic industrial-scale murder and reframes it as just a sad but normal consequence of war. Typhus, starvation. By doing this, he strips the Holocaust of its unique, chilling horror and fundamentally changes its entire historical meaning.
And you can just see on this chart the staggering scale of his revision. He loves to start by attacking that old, inflated figure of 4 million that the Soviets put out right after the war for propaganda purposes, a number, by the way, that historians themselves debunked decades ago. But by attacking that straw man, he makes it seem like all the numbers are just guesses. Then he contrasts it with the established consensus of around 1.1 million, and finally, he presents his own drastically smaller number. The visual difference is just massive, and it's designed to make you doubt everything.
You can really see his playbook here. It's a clear 4-step method. It's all about slowly, methodically eroding your confidence in the truth. Step 1, you attack an old, outdated number to prove that the figures can change. Step 2, you suggest that the current, accepted number is probably just as wrong. Step 3, you bring in your own hand-picked data, focusing only on things that support your case and ignoring everything else. And finally, step 4, you roll out your own, much smaller number, as if it's the result of some brave new research, completely rewriting what happened. So we've looked at the 3 pillars: the missing order from Hitler, the technical impossibilities of the gas chambers, and the numbers game. But how does it all fit together? What's the real point of this whole elaborate construction? And this, right here, is the key to understanding the whole thing. The arguments themselves aren't really the point. Their actual purpose is to serve and build up that persona we talked about at the very beginning. Every single claim about a missing document, a technical detail, or a statistic is really a claim about David Irving himself. It's all designed to prove that he's the brave truth-teller, that he's the meticulous historian fighting a conspiracy. The entire historical argument is just a stage for him to play the hero in his own story. And that brings us to the end of part 1. We've taken apart the architecture of denial. We've seen how the pieces fit together. But it leaves us with the biggest, most important question of all. Why does this work on people? Why is that story of the lone hero so powerful that it can make people believe things that just completely fall apart under real scrutiny? In part 2, we're going to dive into the psychology behind that appeal and look at how these exact same rhetorical tactics are being used right now in all sorts of other disinformation. It's a question we really all need to be thinking about.